Hello everyone, I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Get comfortable and relax. Story 1. The Thing in the Woods. I go hunting in southern Illinois, on property that has been in my family for generations. It's not just land to me, it's a second home, a place I know better than I know the back of my hand. I've spent countless hours exploring every inch of it. I've caught all the fish the rivers have to offer, hunted every legal game in season and spotted those I couldn't. The terrain, the smells, the sounds, they're etched into my memory. So when I say I've never had an experience like this one, understand that I'm talking about a place where I've always felt completely at ease, no matter the weather, the time, or even the equipment or lack thereof. I had with me. 2 deer seasons ago, I pulled into the farm at around 4:40 in the morning. It was November, so I had at least 2 solid hours before the first light broke the horizon. I stepped out of my truck, the air biting and silent, the sky still blanketed in darkness. I loaded up, my shotgun slung over my shoulder, a revolver and a knife strapped to my belt, a small elbow flashlight clipped to my front, a thermos of coffee in one hand, and a backpack over my shoulder, filled with a book and a few tools for field dressing a deer. Should I get lucky? The tree stand I had in mind that morning wasn't far, less than a mile technically, but it required a rough hike through thick second-growth forest, a descent down a steep hill, a slog across the cold, muddy bottoms, and then a climb up another ridge that always left me breathless. I dreaded that hill every time, but it was worth it for the spot. That stand had brought in more than its fair share of deer. I trudged into the forest, flashlight beam dancing in the darkness, trying to catch the familiar shapes of trees to guide my path. Every few steps I had to turn my whole body to scan the woods. The way the lights swung around in the dark, carving brief glimpses of skeletal trees and frozen underbrush, always reminded me of a horror movie. Even on the best of mornings, the forest was layered in frost, and every footstep cracked and crunched loudly beneath me, no matter how carefully I tried to move. But this time there was another sound, a crunching not my own. Something else was walking close by. I paused, heart suddenly alert, listening. The sound stopped when I did. I moved again, so did it. Not louder than my own footsteps, but distinct. I walked about a quarter of the way up the ridge, listening to this presence. It kept pace with me, always the same distance away. It was too quiet for a deer, too consistent for a raccoon. At first, I thought I might be lucky. Maybe I was hearing a big buck or another early riser. I figured I'd set up where I was, just off the trail by a tree, and wait it out. Maybe whatever it was would hang around until shooting light. I clicked off my flashlight, unslung my shotgun, and laid it across my lap as I sat. The darkness settled around me like a heavy blanket, but I was used to it. I took a few sips of coffee, the steam curling up and disappearing into the blackness. But as the minutes ticked by, the forest went silent. The crunching was gone. Whatever I'd been hearing was no longer there. I waited 15 minutes, long enough that my fingers started to lose feeling, but there was nothing. No footsteps, no rustling, just the forest holding its breath. I stood up, feeling a mix of disappointment and unease. Maybe my flashlight scared it off. I figured I'd head to the stand and wait the rest of the morning there, but as I took a few steps forward, the sound returned. The crunching, like a mirror of my own movements. It was close. Now I was starting to get nervous. I turned off my light and tried to melt into the darkness, stepping behind a tree, staying still, and again the sound stopped. Dead silence. It was mimicking me. 2 more minutes passed like that, my breath catching in clouds in front of me. I moved again, and the crunching followed, always with a fraction of delay, just long enough to sound like it was trying to stop when I did, but not quite fast enough. It wasn't just following me. It wasn't a deer. It wasn't a coyote. This felt different. Human, almost. I've dealt with poachers and trespassers before, and I know the type, but they usually make themselves scarce once they realize someone's nearby. This thing, it was following, mimicking, hiding. And that's what scared me. I was sweating bullets, even though the cold was cutting through my coat. I abandoned my thermos next to a tree so I could keep my flashlight in one hand and revolver in the other. The last 100 feet to the stand I did walking backward, facing the noise, hoping the eye contact, or at least the attention, would keep it from moving. And it worked. The noise stopped. I climbed into my stand as fast as I could without making too much noise. Once I was up and settled in, I lit up a cigarette, then another, and another. 5 in a row. I didn't even like to smoke that much anymore, but it made me feel grounded, human, like I was still part of the world I understood. I stayed in the stand for an hour of daylight, barely paying attention to the woods. My focus was behind me, around me, trying to sense if whatever it was had followed me. But there was nothing. The sunlight poured through the branches, soft and golden, trying to warm the cold that had settled into my bones. Still. I didn't relax. Eventually I climbed down and made my way back to the truck. I wasn't moving slowly either, I was half jogging. Even with the sun out and the birds chirping, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that I'd been marked somehow. I never told my family about it, not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't think they'd believe me. And honestly, I wouldn't blame them. I didn't see anything. Not a flash of movement, not a shadow, not a single pair of eyes in the dark. Just sound. Footsteps. Crunching leaves that stopped when I did and moved when I moved. I've spent thousands of hours in those woods, through every season, in every weather. I've slept on the ground, tracked deer through snow, fished under a full moon. Nothing has ever come close to that morning. And that's what unsettles me the most. If it was a person, why didn't they speak? Why didn't they run? Why would they follow me in that manner? Quiet, deliberate, calculated. If it wasn't a person, what was it? I still go hunting, but now I let people know where I'm going and how long I plan to be gone. I keep my phone on me, I carry a bigger flashlight. I never walk backward up a hill anymore, but I glance over my shoulder far more often than I used to. Because I never did figure out what was in the woods that morning. And I'm not sure I want to. Story 2, the night they came for me. Growing up in the 1990s meant being surrounded by the image and idea of aliens. They were always there, floating at the edges of popular culture, subtly threading themselves into the fabric of everyday life. They were in the movies I watched with my cousins on Friday nights, in the cartoons I laughed at on weekend mornings, and in the toy stores where strange green figures with big black eyes lined the shelves alongside dinosaurs and robots. Independence Day, Men in Black, Mars Attacks, E.T., The X-Files, Invader Zim, Alf, Third Rock from the Sun. They were always there, watching, waiting. Just fictional, of course. Or at least, that's what I believed. My family wasn't particularly obsessed with the idea of aliens. I don't remember either of my parents ever making a big deal about them, but they also didn't discourage talk of them. There was no taboo, no fear, no dogma, just an open space where strange topics were fair game. Maybe that's why even as a kid, I never questioned their existence. I accepted it as a kind of background truth, like the ocean is blue, fire is hot, and aliens are out there somewhere. I had heard all the stories, the ones about abductions and the strange lights in the sky, the missing time, the crop circles, but to me, those stories always belonged to someone else. They were fascinating, spooky even, but distant, harmless. They weren't real in the way that a scraped knee or a bully at school was real. They didn't scare me. That is, not until the night when something strange happened, something that would change the way I looked at the sky, and more importantly, something I don't even remember experiencing. I've always been a bit of a restless sleeper. My mum called me a sleep mumbler when I was younger. I'd mutter gibberish under my breath while I slept, sometimes even responding vaguely to questions she'd ask as she tucked me in or checked on me at night. But around the age of 9 or 10, that harmless quirk turned into something else, something unsettling. I started sleepwalking. Not every night, but often enough that my parents began to worry. They'd find me standing in the hallway or sitting on the living room couch in the dark, staring blankly at nothing. Sometimes I'd be holding objects from the kitchen or trying to open the front door. They'd guide me back to bed gently, and by morning, I would remember none of it. There was one night, though, that was different. One night that rattled them both, and that they would talk about only rarely, and always with a quiet unease in their voices. My mum told me about it years later, though I can still see the flicker in her eyes when she recalls it. She'd come upstairs to check on me before she went to bed, just like she always did. But when she opened the door to my room, I wasn't in bed. At first, she thought I might be in the bathroom, but something made her step farther into the room, and a small figure was crouched in the closet, tucked into the dark corner behind my hanging jackets and toys. At first, she couldn't tell it was me. She thought maybe I had dragged in some stuffed animal or thrown a pile of clothes into the corner. But then I moved. She called my name, softly at first, then louder. As she stepped closer, she saw that I was crying. Quiet, choked sobs, muffled against the fabric of my pajama shirt. She knelt down to me, trying to touch my shoulder to guide me out of the closet. And that's when I started to scream. I lashed out, hitting her arm and shrieking something she could barely understand. My dad rushed up the stairs, and when he tried to pick me up, I struck him in the face. I've never done anything like that before or since. I've always been gentle, even in my sleep. But that night, I fought them both like a cornered animal, flailing, screaming, crying. There was fear in my voice, fear like they had never heard come from me. The words I kept saying over and over were strange and chilling. The aliens. Don't let them take me again. Please, please don't let them take me again. Eventually I cried myself out. Exhaustion overtook the fear, and I went limp in my mother's arms. She changed my pajamas, tucked me into bed, and sat beside me for over an hour until my breathing was slow and steady. She told me that I never opened my eyes fully, not even once. She said it was as though I never really woke up. The next morning she asked me about it gently, over a bowl of cereal. She asked if I remembered having a bad dream. I blinked at her, confused. What dream? I asked. I had no memory of it. Not a single image, not a single sound, not even a leftover feeling of dread. She looked at me for a long moment and then just smiled. It's okay, she said. You're all right now. And that was the end of it. Or at least, that's what I thought. They never pressed me for answers, they never took me to a doctor, they didn't seem to want to explore it further, and maybe that was for the best. After all, I hadn't been hurt, I didn't remember it, and to them it was probably just a very bad episode of sleepwalking mixed with an overactive imagination. But even though I couldn't recall what had happened, I was left with something I couldn't quite explain, a faint, glowing ember of fear deep in my chest. It didn't come when I was awake. It came when I was about to drift off to sleep, when the world got quiet and the stars outside my window seemed to hum. A quiet, unspoken question echoed inside me. Would they come back? As I got older, the sleepwalking stopped. The mumbles faded. I became a normal kid again, busy with school and sports and cartoons. But the story never left me, and every so often, especially on clear nights when the sky was thick with stars, I would feel that quiet hum again, that whisper of something just beyond memory, something I couldn't quite name. Years later, as a teenager, I started digging through alien abduction accounts online. Most of them were too far-fetched for me to believe, but every now and then, I'd stumble across a detail that made the hairs on my neck stand up. Someone describing being returned to their home without memory of how they got there. Someone talking about crouching in their closet, screaming about being taken. Someone else saying they lost hours, even days, and had no idea what happened. And that's when I realized something. I never thought I was afraid of aliens. But maybe that's because I couldn't remember what happened that night. Maybe the memory had been taken from me. Maybe that's why the fear came only in the silence, in the dark, in the moments before sleep. Not as a thought, but as a feeling, pure and bone deep. I talked to my mum about it again in my early 20s. I asked her to walk me through the night. She was quiet for a long time, and then she gave me the same details as before, but this time she added something. She said that as she sat beside me after I had fallen back asleep, she noticed something else. I had small bruises on my ankles, not large, but distinct, circular, almost like someone had gripped me hard and left marks. She hadn't told me about them at the time, because she didn't want to scare me. But she remembered. They had faded by morning. I don't know what happened that night. I don't claim to have been abducted. I never saw lights in the sky. I never woke up in a cold sweat with images of grave figures in my head. But something happened. Something strange. Something that left a mark, not just on my skin, but on my sense of safety in the world. I haven't sleepwalked since that night, and I haven't talked about it with my parents in years. But every now and then, I'll look up at the sky and wonder. I'll remember the story they told me, and I'll feel the shadow of something I never saw, but somehow still fear. Because whether I remember it or not, that night changed something. And deep down, a part of me still waits for the sound of footsteps in the hall, the whisper of the closet door creaking open, the feeling of being lifted from my bed without ever waking up, just like it happened before. Story 3. The Man on the Bench. Nearly 2 years ago, my husband and I made a decision that felt equal parts thrilling and practical. We were still young, child-free, and filled with that kind of wide-eyed optimism that whispers, now is the time. So we moved to a lively downtown apartment built above a shopping centre. It wasn't just a place to live, it was a lifestyle, a beautiful blend of convenience and excitement, the kind of place where everything you need is just an elevator ride away. Restaurants, boutiques, coffee shops, a movie theatre. We were living the dream, or so it felt. Our apartment sat on the top floor of the building, and from the balcony, we could see the vibrant hum of activity below us. The lights stayed on late into the night, and the sound of laughter, the soft hum of conversation, and the occasional burst of music would float up like whispers of life from the streets. It was a safe town, known for its family-friendly neighborhoods and clean downtown area. We never worried about anything. Not really. Not until something happened that shattered our sense of security and confirmed the strange feeling I had been carrying for years. I've always loved walking. There's something therapeutic about the rhythm of it, the steady beat of my shoes on pavement, the way my thoughts wander and how the world slows down. And living in such a bustling, pedestrian-friendly area made walking even more inviting. So, whenever I found myself with a spare half hour or a need to clear my head, I'd lace up my shoes and head out alone. My walks took me through the very heart of the shopping centre, past store windows, food courts, the movie theatre entrance, and the small outdoor benches where people gathered to chat or take a break. That's where I first noticed him. He was always sitting in the same spot, an older man, probably in his late 60s. He wore a dark coat, no matter the season, and usually had a beanie tugged low over his forehead, partially obscuring his face. He was thin, with a kind of stillness about him that made him easy to miss if you weren't looking. But once you did notice him, you couldn't unsee him. He wasn't doing anything outwardly suspicious. He wasn't panhandling, talking to himself, or following anyone. He just watched. At first, I didn't think much of it. Cities are filled with all kinds of people. Maybe he was just someone who enjoyed being around others without really participating. Maybe he had nowhere else to go. Maybe this was his routine, just like my walks were mine. But over time, something about him began to bother me. It was subtle at first, a glance that lasted too long, a shift in posture as I passed, a faint feeling of being observed. I'd find myself tensing when I saw him, diverting my route, walking a little faster, and then, almost immediately, I'd feel guilty. I would scold myself in my mind. Maybe I was being unfair, maybe he was just lonely, maybe I was projecting something onto him that didn't belong. But that sense of unease never truly left. Every time I saw him, it returned, that gut-deep flutter of anxiety, that strange instinct that whispered, "Something isn't right here." For nearly 2 years, this pattern repeated. I'd go for walks, see the man, feel unsettled, and then brush it off. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself I was overreacting. I never saw him do anything illegal or overtly threatening. He just existed in that space, a silent shadow on a busy street. Then, one night, everything changed. It was around 8 in the evening, a time I rarely went out alone, especially in the darker months. That night, however, I was at home reading when my phone buzzed. A text from a neighbor. "Did you hear about what happened at the shopping center last night?" I blinked at the message, confused. No, I hadn't heard anything. I wasn't even aware that something had happened. I texted back, asking for details. And what I got in return made my blood run cold. There had been a shooting, not just a random act of violence, but a targeted, terrifying event. An older man had abducted a woman at gunpoint from the very shopping center I walked through nearly every day. He had forced her into his car, assaulted her, and tried to flee with her. Her husband had chased after them in his own vehicle and had fired shots in an attempt to save her. Miraculously, she was rescued. The man was arrested and later confessed to the police. That confession, that's when the pieces started falling into place. Like a sickening puzzle I never wanted to solve. The man had been stalking the area, watching, observing the women who walked through the shopping center, planning, waiting, looking for the right moment to strike. He admitted to frequenting the benches and sitting there for hours at a time, watching women just like me. I remember staring at the screen, the words swimming before my eyes. My stomach knotted and I felt like I couldn't breathe. I knew it. I had known it. All those times I passed him. All those moments I felt his gaze lingering. All the quiet alarms my body tried to send to my brain, and all the times I silenced them. He had been there, right in my path, watching me, maybe even choosing me before deciding on someone else. The realization hit me like a crashing wave. The number of times I had been out there alone, the number of times I had told myself not to be that woman who assumes the worst. The number of times I had made myself smaller, quieter, less suspicious, because I didn't want to seem rude or dramatic. And yet, my gut had been right all along. I couldn't stop replaying the memories, the silent glances, the way he would sometimes shift just slightly when I walked past, the low pull of fear I had buried under politeness and rationalization. I felt violated in a way, like I had been unknowingly auditioning for a role in a nightmare, and somehow, some twist of fate or timing or luck had kept me out of that car. But I had walked close, so close, to the edge. The worst part was realizing just how often we do this to ourselves. How often we train ourselves to suppress discomfort for the sake of civility. How often we ignore our instincts because we don't want to be rude or wrong. We call it paranoia. We say we're imagining things. We try to explain it away. But sometimes our instincts are screaming because they know something we don't. I told my husband everything that night. He held me tightly as I cried, not just for the woman who had been taken, but for myself. For every time I had second-guessed my own survival instincts, I kept thinking about how easily it could have been me. How many times I had been the only one out there. How many times I had been too trusting. We filed a report. Even though I hadn't technically been a victim, I gave my statement. I described the man in as much detail as I could recall. I told them about the bench, the coat, the way he always sat, the unease that crept up my spine every time he looked at me. And when they showed me a picture, I knew instantly it was him, the man from the bench. They said my information matched what other women had described, that he'd been sitting there for years, blending in unnoticed by most, a ghost among the crowds. After that, things were different. I stopped walking alone. I stopped telling myself to ignore my gut. I started listening more closely to the quiet signals my body gives me when something is off, and I started sharing my story because I wanted other women to know that it's okay to trust that feeling, that being polite should never come at the cost of being safe. I still live in that apartment, but the shopping centre doesn't feel the same anymore. The lights are still bright, the shops still bustle, but there's a shadow there now, a memory, a ghost of what could have been. Sometimes I still see the bench where I used to sit. It's empty now, and every time I walk past it, I feel that same shiver run down my spine, but I don't ignore it anymore. I don't push it away, because now I know. Trust your gut. Always. Story 4, Fog on the Cabin Trail. There is something deeply comforting about the solitude of the north, the endless trees, the wide sky, and the way silence blankets the land like fresh snow. I've lived most of my life in northern Canada, and there's a peace out here that I've never found anywhere else. It's the kind of peace that can only come from distance. Distance from crowds, from noise, from distractions. But sometimes that same distance can turn against you, and in the cold stillness, when you're all alone, peace can become vulnerability. Calm can turn to dread. Last weekend I got a call from a friend. He'd been out on a skidoo trip, just following his usual route through the woods when he passed by my cabin. My place isn't too far off the trail, nestled deep in a thicket of pines, but it's remote enough that I don't get many visitors, especially not in winter. So I was surprised to hear from him, and even more surprised by what he had to say. "Hey," he said, voice muffled by static. "I think someone broke into your cabin. The windows are all smashed." My heart sank. I thanked him, hung up, and immediately grabbed my boots and coat. My cabin meant a lot to me. It wasn't just a storage shed or some backup property. It was my escape, my quiet place, somewhere I built up with my own hands, over years, a little at a time. It was rustic, sure, no running water, no power, but it was mine. To hear that someone had broken into it, it felt like a violation. I went out to my shed and started loading up my ski and sled with tarps and boards. My goal was simple: patch up the broken windows, keep the snow out, and secure the place until I could make proper repairs in the spring. But as I was loading up, something tugged at my gut, something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't panic, just a twinge, a tightness across my chest. I paused, my hand hovering over my gear. I didn't like to admit it, but I had the feeling I should take a rifle. I stood there for a moment debating. It seemed unnecessary, but still. Better safe than sorry. Something was off. I could feel it in my bones. With the rifle slung across my back, I set off into the woods. The trail was quiet, still. The sky above had begun to darken, not with nightfall, but with fog. A thick, rolling wall of it moved in fast, devouring trees, smoothing edges, muting the world. The kind of fog that silences your own thoughts, that makes the forest feel like it's holding its breath. There's nothing more unsettling than being alone in the woods in a fog like that. The way sound is muffled, the way shapes blur, how you can't quite tell what's near and what's far. It makes you feel like you're walking through someone else's dream. I kept going, pressing through the creeping white haze, following the memory of the trail more than the trail itself. After what felt like hours, I finally reached the cabin. He'd been right. All the windows were shattered. The glass had been blown inward, scattered across the floor like ice shards. It didn't look like a break-in so much as a storm or a brawl. The door was ajar, the air inside sharp with cold and stale with silence. I stepped in slowly, rifle ready, but the place was empty, quiet, just broken glass and overturned items. I set down my gear and got to work. I wanted to be fast, secure the place and leave before the fog thickened even more. The boards went up without issue. The tarps were harder to manage in the damp air, but I worked quickly, hammering, sealing, patching. My fingers burned from the cold, but I didn't stop. I wanted to finish before dark. I didn't want to spend a second more than I had to out there. Then I heard it, a sound in the trees, something moving. I stopped mid-swing, the hammer still raised, and turned my head slowly. The fog pressed against the windows now, wrapping the cabin like a blanket. Visibility was near zero, but I knew what I had heard. Branches snapping, a soft crunch in the snow. Something was out there. I grabbed my rifle, backing up slowly toward the far wall. My heart thumped in my chest, not a panicked beat, but a steady drum of adrenaline. I waited, listening, hoping it was nothing. A deer, maybe, a fox. But the sound didn't return. Not at first. Then it came again, closer this time. A slow shift of weight, like someone circling the cabin. The thing about fog is it plays tricks on your ears. It warps distance. A twig snapping 20 feet away can sound like it's right beside you. But this didn't feel distant. This felt close. Too close. I pressed my back to the wall, my eyes locked on the window pane nearest the sound. I thought irrationally about the broken windows, how the smashed glass might have come from outside. Could something or someone have thrown a rock or clawed at them? That's when the fog moved. Or maybe it wasn't the fog itself, but something within it. A shadow, tall, pale, moving just on the edge of what I could see. I couldn't breathe. I stayed frozen in place for minutes, rifle ready, ears straining, eyes darting to every dark corner of the swirling white beyond the glass. But nothing moved again. Whatever it was, if it had ever really been there, was gone. I got back to work, but my pace was quicker now, less careful. I needed to be done. I needed to leave. When I stepped back outside, the air had grown colder. The fog pressed closer. The trees looked taller somehow, the world smaller. I strapped my gear to the sled and climbed onto the skidoo. And that's when I saw them. Tracks, fresh ones. They crossed the trail in front of my cabin, large, deep, perfectly spaced. I cut the engine and climbed off, crouching to get a closer look. My breath caught in my throat. They weren't human. They weren't deer, they weren't moose or caribou. They were bear tracks. Polar bear. Out here they're not common, but they're not impossible either, especially with the changing climate. I'd heard stories, seen the warnings, but I'd never encountered one myself, not in the wild. The size of the prints was staggering. The weight, the direction. They led right to my cabin. The realization hit me in slow motion. The movement I'd heard, the sense of being watched, the smashed windows, the shadow in the fog. It wasn't a man. It wasn't a thief. It was a bear, a massive, silent predator. It had been there with me, watching, waiting, maybe curious, maybe hungry, maybe trying to get in. I was lucky, so incredibly lucky that I hadn't seen it, that it hadn't come closer, because in fog like that, I would have had no warning, no defense. My rifle, as solid as it felt in my hands, would have been practically useless against something that size, especially if it decided to charge. The fog had been my enemy, but it had also been my shield. Or maybe it had just been luck. Either way, I didn't waste time. I got back on the skidoo and rode. Hard and fast, my fingers stiff, my eyes straining through the white. The trail felt longer than before. The trees leaned in closer. The cold bit deeper. But I didn't stop. Not until the cabin was far behind me. Not until the trees thinned and the fog began to fade. When I finally got home, I stood in the doorway for a long time, just breathing. The warmth of the house felt unreal, the lights too bright, everything too still. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even though I was miles away now. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed with the rifle propped beside me, the echo of the silence still ringing in my ears. I kept thinking about the footprints, the way they curved around the cabin, the way they disappeared into the woods. I kept thinking about how close it had been, how easily it could have ended differently. The next day, I called a conservation officer, told them what I'd seen. They said it wasn't the first polar bear sighting that season. Climate shifts, they said. Hungry animals, long migrations. They'd patrol the area, but they couldn't guarantee anything. So I wait now, and I watch. And when I go back to the cabin, I carry more than a rifle. I carry caution. I carry the memory of that fog, the weight of those prints, and I never forget the feeling of something just beyond the window, something watching, something waiting, something bigger than me. Story 5. Something was in the back seat. Driving at night always felt like therapy to me. I don't know how else to describe it. There's something about the way the streets empty out, the buildings grow quiet, and the world seems to take a deep breath and go still. It was in those hours, past midnight when most people were asleep, that I found a kind of peace. I'd roll down the windows, let the cold air in, play something soft through the speakers, and just drive. The world felt manageable then. Small, quiet, mine. That's why I started driving for DoorDash on the side. It gave me an excuse to be out there, to cruise the city when it was most silent, and get paid for it too. My wife hated it, of course. Said I was crazy for driving around the west side and south side after dark. She called it reckless, said nothing good ever happened after midnight. But I never saw it that way. For over a year, I'd driven at night, sometimes till 1 or 2 in the morning, and not once did I feel unsafe. Not once. Until tonight. The shift started like any other. I logged in around 5 p.m, hoping to catch the dinner rush. It was slow. I spent the first hour parked at a gas station waiting for orders to come in. I got out, stretched my legs, walked inside, grabbed a soda and a water. Nothing unusual. But I remember something strange started around 6. It was subtle, hard to name at first. Just a jittery kind of restlessness. My legs wouldn't stay still. It was like I had this pent-up energy, but not the good kind, the kind that builds in your chest and makes you feel like you've forgotten something important. I got back in the car and told myself to shake it off. By 7, I was back in my rhythm. Orders were coming in, I hit the west side and started making decent money. Everything was fine. The weird jittery feeling from earlier had faded, or so I thought. But then the mistakes started. I was making wrong turns, driving too slowly. At one point I stopped at a green light as if it were a stop sign and someone honked at me. It was like I was slightly out of sync with everything, like I was a second behind the rest of the world. Still, I kept going. I told myself I was just tired, maybe hadn't eaten enough. Nothing to worry about. At 8 o'clock, I moved over to the south side. That's when things started to shift for real. I remember watching the sun vanish beneath the horizon, the way it always did, but this time it felt like the darkness came on too fast, like the light had been swallowed, not replaced. I drive this route almost every night, and never, not once, had I noticed how quickly it got dark. But that night it was sudden, heavy, the kind of darkness that settles into the bones of a neighborhood and drapes everything in silence. I tried to ignore it. I had work to do. But the feeling came back, stronger this time. The same jitteriness in my legs, the same tight pressure in my chest. I felt like I needed to run, like I was being chased, but by what I had no idea. I stayed in the car, kept doing my job, but I started noticing strange details. The streetlights didn't seem as bright. The shadows stretched longer than they should have, and the silence? It was louder than anything I'd ever heard. I picked up an order around 8:40. The restaurant was quiet, like most places are at that hour. But as I waited for the food, I felt it. A sensation I've never had before, like the darkness around me was alive. Not just absence of light, but presence. As if the night itself was watching me, pressing in close, wrapping around my body. It was cold, but I was sweating. My hands were shaking slightly. The food was ready. I grabbed it and got back in the car. The next delivery was on the western edge of the south side, an area I knew well. I'd driven it hundreds of times. But when I pulled up to the house and parked the car, I felt like I'd been dropped into a dream. Everything looked normal. There was a porch light on, a few windows glowing from within, a car in the driveway, but I felt wrong. Not just nervous, terrified. The kind of fear that bypasses logic and slams straight into your chest. I sat there in the car, staring at the house, gripping the steering wheel, and suddenly I felt it. A weight behind me, the distinct, unmistakable sensation of being watched, not from outside the car, from within. I couldn't bring myself to turn around. I just sat there, heart pounding, staring straight ahead while every instinct screamed that something was sitting in the back seat. I felt pressure, like a physical presence. The air was thicker, heavier, and the worst part? It didn't feel human. It felt ancient, cold, intentional. Finally, I mustered the courage to turn. I snapped around, eyes wide, and saw nothing. But that was the problem. It wasn't empty. It was darkness itself that stared back at me. Not the kind of darkness that fades when a light turns on. This felt solid, heavy, like it had mass, like it was sitting there with purpose. The shadows in the back seat weren't just shadows. They were shapes, forms, watching. I flung the door open and stumbled out into the cold night. My breathing was ragged, my hands shaking. Another car pulled into the driveway. A woman, presumably the one who ordered the food, sat in her car, staring at her phone. I thought maybe I could give the order to her and leave, but she didn't get out. Just sat there, watching me. I forced myself to walk up to the door. Each step felt like I was wading through molasses. I dropped the bag, snapped a photo for the app, and turned back toward the car. She was still in her car. I got in quickly, locked the doors, turned to check the back seat again, still empty. But that feeling, God, that feeling, it came back like a tidal wave. The weight, the crushing pressure, as if the darkness itself had climbed in behind me. I could feel it pressing into the back of my seat, could feel its eyes. Even though there was nothing there, I could feel everything. I drove away without thinking, tires squealing slightly on the pavement. As I pulled out, I glanced back at the house. The woman's car was empty, gone. She hadn't passed me. I would have seen her, heard her. How did she disappear? I didn't have an answer. At 9:30, I ended my shift. I parked in a grocery lot and just sat there, staring at the steering wheel, tears silently sliding down my face. I wasn't crying because I was sad. I was crying because something had touched the part of me that I didn't know could feel fear that deeply. I felt hollow, like something had reached into me, scooped something out and left me with a gaping, silent void. When I got home, my wife was surprised to see me early. I walked in, arms shaking, face pale. She asked if I was okay and I collapsed into her arms, sobbing. I didn't have the words to explain it. I still don't. It's been hours since that moment, and I haven't turned off a single light in the house. I've double-checked the doors. I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I feel that presence again. Not just memory, but proximity, as if it followed me home, as if it's still here. My wife asked me to take the trash out to the dumpster earlier, and I couldn't. I tried, I really did, but I got to the door, looked out into the night, and froze. I couldn't take another step. Something is still out there, or worse, something is still in here. I don't know what happened tonight. I don't know if it was supernatural or psychological or something in between. But I do know this. There was something in the back seat of my car. It may have been made of shadow or thought or fear itself, but it was real, and it looked at me. Story 6, The Shadow in the Undergrowth. And there's a rhythm to rural life, a cadence that sets into your bones the longer you stay among the fields and the trees. I was born into that rhythm, in a small provincial town in Ecuador, where the sky stretched wide and clear, and the cattle grazed over green hills that rolled endlessly toward the horizon. My father worked the land with a devotion I always admired, and as his son, I learned early the value of tending to the animals, the patience of long rides, the quiet power of doing what needed to be done, even when no one was watching. It was during one of those rides, just an ordinary afternoon check on the cattle, that I encountered something I still can't fully understand. Something that shook the rhythm of my world and left me questioning what it was I had actually seen out there. It was summer around 2014. I was helping my father maintain the livestock as I did most weekends after school. Our land wasn't vast enough to support all the cattle during the dry season, so we rented an adjacent pasture about an hour's ride away. On this particular Saturday, I had missed the morning routine for one reason or another, perhaps chores, or maybe I had just slept in longer than I should have, so I saddled up our horse, a calm and noble creature named Loco, and set out for the remote pasture in the early afternoon. The trip was familiar, a soft sun overhead, birds chirping in the canopy, the sound of hooves tapping against the dirt road, past small creeks, terraced farmland, and fences strung with weather-worn wire. Everything moved at the slow, steady pace of the countryside, and Loco, true to his name, though it had become more of a term of endearment, carried me with his usual balance of grace and strength. I checked on the cattle without incident. They were spread across the field, grazing in the tall grass, some clustered beneath the sparse shade of a few trees. There were no signs of injury or strays, no predators, no problems. The sky was beginning to turn a little golden at the edges by the time I decided to make my way back home. It was about 5:30 in the afternoon, and though the sun still shone, the light was starting to dip, casting shadows longer and softer than before. About 30 minutes into the return journey, I noticed a change. At first, it was just a feeling, a faint tingling across the back of my neck, the kind of subtle alertness that's hard to justify but impossible to ignore. I tried to brush it off. Maybe a breeze, I thought, maybe a chill rising from the ground as the day cooled. But then I realized there was no wind at all. The air was still, almost too still. Loco's ears twitched suddenly. His gait, once smooth and easy, became erratic. He began to fidget beneath me, struggling against the reins. His ears flicked back and forth as if trying to lock onto a sound, and his head kept turning, eyes wide, nostrils flaring. I whispered calmly to him, gently pulling the reins to steady him. It wasn't like him to spook. He was a seasoned horse, used to wildlife, used to long rides and the occasional noisy distraction, but this was different. He wasn't just alert, he was anxious, frightened, trying to flee. And that's when I felt it. The temperature around me dropped. Not drastically, but noticeably. A chill crept in from nowhere, slithering across my skin and up into my spine. I looked around, scanning the brush along the edge of the road. Everything looked normal. Trees, shrubs, tangled undergrowth. Nothing out of place. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A black silhouette. It wasn't standing. It wasn't running. It wasn't walking. It was just there. Suddenly, impossibly, appearing to slide through the tall grass, slipping along the line of the fence that separated our path from the dense woods beyond. It was about 1.5 meters tall, maybe more. Not towering, but not small. Human-shaped, but off somehow. Distorted. There were no details, no face, no limbs I could make out. Just a solid, dark form, moving in a way that defied everything I knew about how bodies moved. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. But not by running, not by ducking. It just dissolved. 1 second it was there, and the next it was gone, slipping into the undergrowth like smoke into the air. And as it disappeared, the brush where it had passed began to tremble violently. It was like something enormous had just bulldozed through the foliage, breaking branches, flattening grass, cracking twigs. And yet, nothing came out the other side. No animal I've ever known moves like that, silently and then with that kind of sudden eruption. No animal disappears like that. Not into nothing. Not without sound. Not without reason. Loco went wild. He jerked against the reins, trying to veer off the road. I held on as best I could, pulling hard, shouting his name, urging him to calm down, but he was in full flight mode now, desperate to get away. I barely had time to process what I'd seen, my hands going numb from the force I applied just to hold the reins. He spun and bolted. I didn't fight him. I let him run. We tore down the road, hooves hammering the earth, his muscles taut beneath me. I gripped with my knees, leaned low, braced for every jolt and turn. For what felt like forever, we sprinted down the winding path, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my heart hammering louder than the hoofbeats. My mind was a whirl of disbelief and fear and confusion. I didn't understand what I'd seen, but I knew I wanted to be nowhere near it. Eventually, Loco began to slow. His gallop eased into a trot and then a walk. We were near the edge of a small stream by then, one we usually stopped at on our way home. I slid off the saddle, shaking, drenched in sweat, and knelt to drink. The water was cold, refreshing, grounding, but as I splashed it on my face, a burning sensation started in my eyes. At first I thought it was just the sweat, the salt irritating them, but then the burning intensified, sharp, stabbing like needles dipped in acid. I cried out, stumbling back from the water, blinking rapidly. The pain didn't fade, my vision blurred, colours smearing together, the world dimming. I clutched at my face, trying to make sense of what was happening. When I finally made it home, my mother met me at the door. She took one look at me and gasped. "What happened to your eyes?" she asked, rushing to me. I told her it was just sweat, that I was fine, but she didn't believe me. She led me to a mirror, and when I looked into it, I understood why she had been so alarmed. My eyes were red, not bloodshot, completely red. The whites had disappeared, replaced with a deep, vivid crimson that looked unnatural. My irises were nearly swallowed by the red, and it looked as though I had been crying blood. There was no pain now, just the raw, burning aftermath. It was like my body had reacted to something it couldn't explain. We went to a doctor. He ran tests, took samples, examined me under every light imaginable. He couldn't find anything. No chemical residue, no scratches or trauma, no infection. He was baffled. He gave me drops, some medicine, but nothing worked. The redness persisted for weeks, then months. My vision stayed mostly intact, but the eerie glow never faded. 2 months later, it simply disappeared, just as mysteriously as it had come. I told my brother what had happened. He was skeptical at first, but agreed to check out the area where I'd seen the silhouette. He rode out the next morning, searched the woods, examined the brush. He came back with a strange look on his face. "There's nothing," he said. "No broken branches, no flattened grass, no tracks, no signs of anything." I told him it had trembled, that the undergrowth had been shaking violently. He just shook his head. "Everything's still," he said, "like nothing ever passed through it." We collected water samples, sent them off to be tested. Nothing unusual came back. No toxins, no contaminants, no reason for my eyes to have reacted the way they did. It was like whatever had happened had left no trace, except for the memories it burned into my mind. To this day, I don't know what I saw. Was it a spirit? A creature? A trick of the light? I played the moment over and over again in my head, examining it from every angle, searching for explanations, but none of them fit. The way it moved, the way it vanished, the way the underbrush reacted, the pain in my eyes. It all feels connected yet distant, like a dream I can't wake up from. I haven't gone back to that place since. Loco passed away last year. He was old, his joints stiff but still strong. I miss him deeply. He was the only one who experienced that moment with me. The only one who felt the fear, who saw what I saw, or maybe what I didn't. He didn't need to speak. The way he ran told me everything. I think about him often. The way he protected me. The way he seemed to know something was wrong before I did. Sometimes I wonder if that shadow is still out there, waiting in the trees, watching. I wonder if it chose to reveal itself that day, or if I simply caught a glimpse of something I wasn't meant to see. But more than anything, I wonder what would have happened if Loco hadn't run. Story 7. The Man from the Trail. It started out like any other online connection. A few curious messages exchanged on a dating app. A light back and forth between two people who didn't know each other but were willing to try. I had been through the routine more times than I could count. The scrolling, the small talk, the awkward first meetings. Most of them fizzled out without fanfare. A few were weird, a few were promising, and a few were the kind that made you question why you ever bothered with dating in the first place. But this one was different. Not better, not worse, just different. He seemed serious, I mean that in the literal sense. He didn't have much of a sense of humor. He wouldn't even use an LOL when I made a joke. No emojis, no gifs, no playful flirting, just clean, proper text. He responded in complete sentences, straightforward, reserved. At first, I didn't think much of it. Not everyone is expressive through messaging. Maybe he was just more charismatic in person. I had met a few people like that, quiet on the screen, warm in person, still waters and all that. We shared some common interests, books, nature, hiking. That one caught my attention especially. He said he liked the quiet that came with being deep in the woods, the sense of detachment from the noise of the world. I liked that too. That was something I could relate to. Maybe that's what made me overlook the red flags that started to peek out. The lack of humor, the strange intensity in his writing, the way he talked about himself with a kind of detached superiority. He always mentioned how other people didn't understand him, how they never gave him the respect he deserved. Still, I thought, maybe he was just misunderstood. I gave him the benefit of the doubt. I agreed to meet him at a local restaurant. It was located next to a popular hiking trail. A strange location for a first date maybe, but it was public and familiar. I made sure to message my best friend all the details, the guy's name, what car he drove, even a screenshot of his profile. I wasn't naive. I'd been on the internet long enough to know how quickly things could turn. I told her when I'd be back, just in case. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting in a booth near the window. He waved me over with a small nod. No smile, no expression really, just a quiet acknowledgement of my presence. I sat down and tried to break the ice with a joke about online dating, something about how it was basically like applying for a job you didn't really want. He didn't laugh, just looked at me, blank, unreadable. His eyes didn't seem to move much, but they were fixed on me in a way that made me feel like I was being measured. Scan. He started talking about work. He was a software engineer or something in tech, I think, but it didn't take long before the conversation turned bitter. He went on about how his co-workers were incompetent, how he was constantly overlooked despite being the smartest person in the room. He spoke in long, cold monologues, as though I were a sounding board for his frustrations instead of someone he was trying to connect with. Still, I tried to keep things light. I asked questions. I smiled. I nodded politely, but the more he talked, the more uneasy I became. He never showed emotion, not a twitch of the mouth, not a raised brow, just that constant, blank stare. It was like talking to a mannequin, a very articulate, very bitter mannequin. Then he said it. "Do you want to go for a walk on the trail?" I hesitated. I wasn't sure. We'd just eaten and I wasn't dressed for hiking, but I didn't want to be rude. I told him I needed to use the bathroom first. As I walked away, I pulled out my phone and called my friend. "I don't feel good about this," I whispered into the receiver. "If I text you, call me in 10 minutes and make up an emergency, something, anything, just get me out of this." She understood. She'd done this before, for me and I for her. It was the unspoken contract between women navigating the uncertain waters of modern dating. When I came back, he was standing at the edge of the trailhead, looking into the trees. The sun was low now, casting golden light across the gravel path. There were still people around, couples, joggers, dog walkers, but the deeper you went, the thinner the crowd became. I took a deep breath and joined him. We started walking. At first it wasn't so bad. We stayed on the main path. We talked, or rather, I talked and he answered in short, clipped replies. But then he kept veering off the path. "Come this way," he said at one point. I found this spot earlier. It's beautiful." I stopped walking. Something in me froze. "No," I said lightly, forcing a chuckle. "Let's stay where the trail is. I don't want to get lost." He didn't insist. He just stared at me for a moment too long, then gave a small nod and turned back toward the main trail. That was the moment I knew I had to leave. My phone buzzed in my pocket. My friend calling, right on time. I answered with exaggerated alarm. "What? Are you serious? Okay, I'll be right there." I looked at him with wide eyes. "I'm so sorry, my friend's car broke down. She's stuck and needs me to come help. I'll call you later, okay?" His expression changed. For the first time since I met him, something flickered behind his eyes. Not sadness. Not disappointment. Frustration. Anger. "I'll come with you," he said. "No, it's fine. She's just a few minutes away. I'll be quick. I can meet her." The words were quiet, but they hit like thunder. There was no reason for him to meet her. We had driven separately. He had no obligation, no role in this situation. The insistence made no sense, unless he didn't believe me, unless he knew I was lying, unless he knew I was trying to get away. "I appreciate that," I said, backing away, "but really, she's just up the road." I turned before he could respond, walked briskly back to the parking lot, forcing myself not to look back. Every step felt heavy. I expected to hear him following. I expected a hand on my shoulder. But he didn't follow. He stayed behind. When I got to my car, I locked the doors before even starting the engine. I watched the trailhead. He never emerged. He never said goodbye. He just stayed there in the trees, watching. I drove home in silence, my hands tight around the wheel, my stomach in knots. That night, I blocked him, unmatched, deleted everything. But I never forgot the way he looked at me when I told him I had to leave, like I had ruined something, like I had escaped something, like I had made a mistake, not for agreeing to the date, but for ending it. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had followed him off the trail, what he had planned in that beautiful spot, what was waiting there, what he was waiting for.